Hey, everybody. We are live here on the Sensibly Speaking podcast. I have Dylan Gill, a former Scientologist and Sea Org member from the worked up at the highest levels of Scientology for a while. Dylan, about a year or so ago, was on Aaron Smith-Levin's Growing Up in Scientology channel, and they did a very extensive long-form interview where they talked about his history with the church, what the Church of Spiritual Technology is, and how it relates to RTC, which is, you know, David Miscavige's senior organization that runs and dictates all of Scientology. But the Church of Spiritual Technology is something most people don't ever hear too much about, even Scientologists. So I have a ton of questions because when I was in, I never really knew that much about CST. I knew about this thing called the Archive Project, and we'll talk a little bit about that. In fact, why don't we just go ahead and lead into that? Dylan, welcome to my show.
Thank you. Good to be here, Chris.
Awesome. Well, thanks for doing this, and I've been looking forward to this for a very long time. You have a kind of a standard story, which is not to say that it's in any way less than horrible. It's awful. Scientology is awful with everyone, and you definitely received the brunt of that with your experience. Do you want to just kind of give an overview rather than, you know, get into all the little details of what your experiential history was with Scientology real fast?
Yeah, sure. I grew up with Scientology in my life. My grandparents had tried it out in South Lake Tahoe at the mission there. My uncles, aunts, cousins have all dabbled in it. But my father and my uncle and his wife really got involved. My aunt is OT3 and course soups and worked in missions extensively, and they moved to Florida to kind of be close to it. So it's always kind of been in my life. My uncle's still in, my father's still in, my aunt's still in, my cousins I have cousins in the Sea Org. I have a lot of current, and I have no affiliation with them, but they're currently in. So growing up, it was always kind of a part of my life. Even though my dad was kind of a reverted hippie sort of thing. And I found myself getting recruited at like 12 and 13. And luckily my dad had some sense at that time to kind of deflect it a bit. But once I turned like 14 and 15, my dad was pretty much like, okay, it's time for you to go. And it's funny because I think in Aaron's video, I kind of brushed over a lot of that, but I actually ended up going to the Sea Org from an ethics cycle of I was on my upper indocs at a mission, the upper indoctor TRs. So the, ashtray TRs that most people would know.
Right. Yeah. One at the ashtray. Yeah.
Right. Stand up, sit down, tone 40. Which I still have. No, I'm kidding.
I like to think of myself as tone 80 now.
Right, super intense. But I was kind of skipping the classes every once in a while. My dad would drop me off and go off and do his thing. And sometimes I'd go to the mission and sometimes I'd go to my friend's house, which was close. I got caught and I ended up, just so happened a flag recruiting tour was in town. And I'd already done a project prepare before, so this was like my dad's final straw. And for him to get rid of me, and my father had tried to join the Sea Org a couple of times, but the LSD thing, he didn't really get it timing wise. So him and my uncle were both out-qualled, so I became kind of the guy.
Okay. Out-qualled meaning not qualified for the Sea Org because you can't join the Sea Org if you've taken LSD.
That is
one of the only rules that exists to keep people out of the Sea Org. They'll take just about anybody, but they won't take LSD cases.
You know, it's funny. When I did get to Florida and started my EPF, there was a few guys that had been on the ship before anybody knew about the ship. And they were like people
the free ones, you mean?
Yes, and
Yeah.
but they were before the free ones was even the free ones. It was like when they were looking to purchase it, there were people that were like had been on the ship prior to them buying it, and they had recruited a few of them into Florida that they said they could just go back and work on the ship again, but they had to get through this EPF.
Right.
And those people got routed out left. I mean, they were crazy. My first night at the EPF, I was 15 years old, and there's this like 65-year-old Popeye the Sailor Man, like living I was petrified, you know? And he ended up getting completely fitness boarded out. And then
Wow.
I went
Now this was, what was this, 85, 86?
Yeah, 85. Yeah.
85. Okay. Because the Free Winds was this motor vessel, this basically this very large yacht. They even tried to rebrand it as a very, very, very large yacht rather than a really tiny cruise ship.
Right.
And but they had purchased this thing, or they had been running around purchasing ships in the mid 80s, or looking to purchase this ship in the mid 80s, and then they finally hit on this Free Winds ship, or they got this boat and renamed it the Free Winds, and so they were trying to get people who knew how to do something on boats, and I find that hilarious given that it's the Sea Organization.
It's weird that they took a lot of the old crew and tried to get them through the Scientology courses so they could go back on and work on the ship, because they didn't know how to do any of it.
Exactly. Because again, millions of members. Yeah, right. They can't find anybody in Scientology or the Sea Org who's got, ocean going experience. So they had to, get outside professionals.
Well, I think that'll tie in quite a bit, actually. And not that I'm forgetting to answer your question about how I got in, but
no, keep going.
The ship project was real parallel to the archive CST conundrum of that it was super duper confidential. Nobody knew about it. It was all like, you're buying this ship. I learned about it on the EPF and didn't even know I wasn't supposed to know about it, because I happened to be in the same room as a guy that was on the ship that they just bought. And so it kind of, none of the staff, none of the higher ups, not even CMO at that point, which was the Commodore's Messenger org, really knew about that project being purchased. And it was right in their backyard.
And this was in Clearwater where you were joining?
Yeah, this was in Clearwater. I was on the West Coast in Northern California, and I was sent to Clearwater to go to join the Sea Org.
Okay.
Which turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because PAC and Flag are just, Flag was terrible and disgusting, but PAC was worse than Flag. So it was, when I went there to go to CMO IXU, I was just like, oh my God. And I had the same idea that like PAC must be gorgeous and beautiful and Flag sucks, and we're trying to make, and oh my God, it wasn't even close to that.
No, especially in the mid 80s, PAC was just a hellhole.
Oh, it was disgusting. Yeah. Oh, my first, it was terrible.
I first encountered PAC. I think I first encountered PAC when I was about 7 years old. My dad took me around, but as far as actual going down there, it was 1987 that I first went down there as a Santa Barbara.
Oh, okay. Right.
But you were down there earlier. So what else happened?
In Florida, so long story short, because it was on Aaron's thing, I signed my Sea Org contract again. I think I had signed it twice prior when I was 12 and 13, and finally I signed it again, did a couple repair past ethics conditions. And my dad was he was a very, and still is a very hardcore Scientologist. He wanted me to route directly onto the RPF at Flag. And at the time,
RPF?
The RPF.
Your dad wanted you to go to the RPF?
Yeah, Rusty Gill, teacher at Delphi, where if anybody that went to Delphi knows my dad and is like, my God, he's such a great human being and awesome. And he's a hardcore Scientologist. We had stat graphs. I used to get flunked for doing the dishes wrong and, have to redo them all. And so honestly, when I went to the EPF, I went there thinking I was like ethics bait. And when I got there, I was like, oh my God, pure as the driven snow. Like I got traded to CMO. I went right into the CMO EPF. I was recruited for Flag Crew, which is the estates division or the states org for the Flag land base. And halfway through my EPF, I was informed that I'm now CMO.
Wow.
And everything kind of changed. So I went directly from EPF to CMO EPF to in the CMO missionary unit and did a ton of missions. And then I went right into HCO as the COPE officer.
All right. So we're throwing a lot of terminology around, and anybody who's struggling to keep up, all he's really saying is he rose up through the ranks pretty quickly,
right,
through various specialist parts of the organization of Scientology and the C organization to go into CMO, the Commodore's Messenger Org, all by itself is a very elite status. Very few Sea Org members are even qualified to go into CMO. It's a constant struggle finding people who are qualified. There are rigorous qualifications. It's not just not taking LSD. It's a certain IQ, certain test scores, certain background and history, no weird sexual stuff. I mean, they love virgins into the CMO. That's why young girls and young men are the ones who get put in there.
Yeah,
because you can't have any weird history sexually. And a bunch of other stuff, which we don't need to get into. The point is that it's sort of the cream of the crop of the Sea Org is CMO, and from CMO is where they find people mostly for RTC and the Church of Spiritual Technology and those other things we're going to talk about. So Dylan, thinking he's scum because his dad raised him like a jerk, comes into Scientology and the Sea Org, and everybody is just like, I can't get enough of this guy. He's wonderful. Let's move him on up the line. And he quickly rises up in the ranks. And that's basically what we're talking about here.
Right. And I was posted in the personnel department, which is the Hubbard Communications Office, which has its own set of special quals besides the org. So I did most of the, like you mentioned about how most of those people go up to INT. I did all the missions for the whole time I was at the Flag Land Base to get people up to INT.
Right.
I did all the INT quals missions and ran those. And I worked directly with the Action Bureau, which is the department in a CMO unit. It's much different than like a service org where they deliver auditing and qual. They have operations and action. So they do invals and invests to all the orgs, and then they fix them with the Action Bureau. So
right. Basically, the idea is that you have a whole organization whose whole job is to inspect and manage and enforce compliance to orders from very senior management levels, and that's the CMO's function, and that's what you were doing.
They're actually called the observation and execution arm for CMO INT.
Exactly.
Which is the same as WDC, Watchdog Committee.
Exactly. So and I will link, I'm kind of bad at this, but I'll put a link down below to the organizational video I put together. So if you're really lost and confused right now, you can watch that video and get the layout of Scientology's hierarchy. It's a lot of minutia. It's a lot of nonsense to have to learn about this stuff. But if you're really going to understand somebody's story from an ex-Sea Org position, you kind of have to understand the structure of Scientology. Otherwise, a lot of these words and stuff we throw around, you can get through it without having to understand all this stuff, but it puts a lot of things in context. That's why we talk about this stuff.
I think, that's a really good point, because one of the things that even from the onset of joining the Sea Org is there's these organization boards and all these divisions, and to man them up fully is hundreds of staff members.
Yep.
Right? And there's only probably, when I was there, 2, maybe 3 organizations that actually had that number of staff members to almost man their whole org. The CMO, we had like 22 people. And we were the biggest CMO unit by like 5 to 10 people.
Right.
So PAC had the Pacific area in the Los Angeles only had like 14 or 13. Europe had like 4 or 5 people. Gold had like 6, but we're still saying, the fastest growing. At that point, Dianetics had been on the bestseller list for like 256 weeks or so. It was ridiculous. And you're just like, no, this doesn't you never think it doesn't jibe. That's what's, when you leave, you're like, wait a minute, there was nobody anywhere. Exactly. We were doing the job of 200 or 300 people with 20 of us.
That's right. That's right. Again, as I've said before, actually, I think we even mentioned this in my interview with Bree last week. It's, there's too few people spread way too thin, trying to do way too much.
Right.
Well, that makes it.
That's what makes it so hard every week. Like everybody's like, well, what do they do every week? They do every job that they don't have personnel for is what they're doing, because they got to report all those stats, and there's nobody so it creates its own problems,
That's right.
And it is weird with all the people that say, well, how could you fall for that? Like for somebody like me, I grew up in it, and you didn't, but even the people that got into it with the help button being pushed, it's when you get into it, it's such a whirlwind, and it's such a thing. I learned at 10 years old how to sell Dianetics books. And I learned, and we used to go out door to door. They would drop you off at like an apartment complex, and you would have a couple Dianetics books in your hands, and they'd make you go door to door, knocking on doors, trying to sell books. For me, it was because I had to get my next course paid for at the mission. So, because my dad wouldn't pay for my classes because that would be out of exchange. And so I had to pay for, so I'm learning all these sales techniques of like, get him to agree, get him to say yes, get him. And, you start pushing people's help buttons, and there's your answer. That's why people can fall. That's why these smart people, intellectual people that went to college can fall for it, because they push the humanity button. And we all have that. We all have, hey, can you help me? Of course I want to help you. Like if it's like, hey, jerk, buy this book, it's like, well, screw you, but it's like, hey, don't you want to make the world a better, don't you hate seeing everybody fight and all the, well, of course I do. Well, you know what? This book's going to help you. And it's like, ding. So I think that's one of those questions that growing up, that's, I grew up with the dynamics of like these 8 urges towards survival, that we're going to help. And if you have them all, then you make the world a better place, And so you're always that's always in the back of your mind when you're doing all this stuff, and you're doing all these jobs, and there's not the personnel, or people get randomly RPF'd for no reason. And you're like, but I like that guy, and he was I'm worse than him, maybe, So it's, I think that's part of the reason why you're able to I don't even think it's close your eyes to it, but never really accept the fact that something bad could be happening, because you've already agreed so much that you're doing so much good. So it's hard to now disagree with yourself that now you're doing bad.
Exactly. So I don't know if people appreciate how many of us also came up through, second gen, third gen.
Right.
A lot of Scientologists these days are second, third, fourth generation Scientologists.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Or they're the old people, who have been around since the 60s or 70s.
Right.
Well, I think most of those guys are probably gone at this point, actually.
Yeah, for the most part. There's a few that I would like to, I wish I knew where they were.
Yeah.
Because there's a bunch of people that I worked with that were really, it was the same thing in the 60s, man. People are trying to help each other. Our world was almost in its infancy socially, and they really had that. They wanted to make the world. They didn't want Russia to drop the bomb. They didn't want they really wanted it to be a better world. And once you're in that bubble, you don't have a chance to think your way out of it.
No.
I almost think it's better to be a second gen, because your innate abilities kind of come out when you start seeing things wrong. Like I've always attributed being a really good messenger and really understanding the policies of Scientology to getting out. Because once those started being violated, I went, wait a second. This isn't the group I was going to be a part of. And I had screwed up ideas then of like, well, if LRH came back, you'd be in trouble and da-da-da. But it was the way I woke up, because I believed in the policy. And when they started contradicting it, and the management started contradicting it, those were big red flags for me.
Yep.
So that's, it's almost like Scientology is what got me out of Scientology. So it's kind of a weird.
No, it's a good point. Actually, you make a very good point, because it was, I don't know that you know, through the 1950s, there wasn't a whole lot of policy in the first place. The organizations were just starting, and that was really, you know, origin story time. 60s was a lot of consolidation and dissemination internationally. They set up an international network. In the 70s, it was a big growth period, and they were still following and writing tons and tons of policy and figuring out the organizational structure and all that. But come the 1980s, you still have new policies and new methods coming out, but Miscavige then starts, you know, what you call cross ordering or, you know, saying, well, this policy says this, but we have this emergency and we don't have time for that. So we have to do this now. And now. And things became even more frantic, more crazy.
Right.
And of course, Scientology made it that way because of what the GO was doing. I mean, they got the FBI raid and bust, and then they busted all the mission holders, and they were just making all their own trouble and making their own emergencies. And Miscavige took advantage of all of that to subvert a bunch of policy and rewrite stuff in his own name. And that's, I don't know, that's kind of how I look at it. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I agree. You know, Flag, when we were there, it was always, especially in the messenger org, because there's messenger orders.
Yep.
And then at Flag, there's OODs, which are orders of the day. And then there's FOs, there's flag orders.
Yep.
And then there's green on white and red on white.
Right.
So green on white being admin policy, red on white being tech policy.
Right.
So there was always a constant struggle of what did you apply and when did you apply it? And, you know, the general rule was green on white trumped almost anything else, but there was flag orders written by L. Ron Hubbard that were commonly used at the base, and those were operated off of because they were his policy basically. So it was kind of convoluted. You could kind of pick and choose your orders. I think one of the main things that happened when I was there was I was around during the whole takeover middle to end of it, but I wasn't privy to it because I was only in the CMO continental unit. I wasn't in an international unit. But like when the loyal officers, when the patent anti-broker issue came out, when they canceled family and having kids, you know, those were things that even in the CMO, we had a really hard time dealing with because it was almost violated direct policy. And it was like, you're getting all these orders down line and you're like, wait a second, like, and then all of a sudden they're gone, or it's like, apply it this way. And, you know, so it was tricky. One of the first things when I ended up at Flag, all I brought was a duffel bag full of clothes and my letters from LRH. And because I was 14, 15 years old, so I didn't really have much else. And I only had
letters from LRH did you have?
Well, you know how you could write a letter to LRH at the mission or org. And my dad, you know, we wrote him not all the time, but often enough, and he would respond. At least so I thought.
Right.
And you know what's strange is like right when I got done with my CMO PF, I was like, you know, well, I have my letters from LRH. And I think our port captain at the time, which is the person in charge of PR and public relations for your org, was like, oh, Sea Org number 1 does that. He never signed any of that. And I was just like...
He just told you that?
Yeah. And it was like, well, he doesn't have the time. He's so busy, so he has a unit to do it. And I was like, oh, of course, right, because he's doing really important stuff. And then I'm thinking... even though it says right there that I can do and I'll sign and do read. I'm like, wait a second.
Exactly. You know? Hubbard literally wrote policy that says, I will see every one of your letters. I want to hear from you. And it's called the SO1 or number 1 line.
Right.
And it's this very important thing in Scientology. When Hubbard was alive, this was a thing. He got bags of letters from people, and he got a lot of letters. And there are so many stories going back to Hannah Eltringham on the ship of throwing bags of letters over the side because they had just gone for months without being answered, and nobody had the time to deal with it. So they just threw them over the side, you know?
Oh, that's hilarious. But exactly. So it's those little moments of like, wait a second. And in the meantime, it was even like we were really getting pushed for for the FSO gross income. That was like our main
money.
Yeah, the money. Flag Service Org, their gross income was the biggest stat. And we would have CMO people come down all the time. And they would come down as like FSO programs ops CMO int. And then they'd send you stuff as WDC FSO in the org. And then and he's like, hey, did you get my message? And I was like, no, I got something from WDC FSO, which is Watchdog Committee Flag Service Org. But it's the same
a senior management person who's responsible for everything that goes on in Clearwater.
Exactly,
basically.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're their observation and execution arm.
Right.
So every once in a while they'd come into our org, but they'd make those little security mistakes. And it happened to me a bunch. Like it happened to me in CMO IXU, which is in Los Angeles, and they're called the International Extension Unit, which is IXU. We ate at the dining hall at the exec dining. So I ate lunch with like Norman Starkey, Guillaume Lusarve,
Guillaume Lusarve,
and but Pablo. I put Pablo on post. WDC SMI.
Wow. See, very, very, very senior people in Scientology.
Right. I ate lunch with them every day. So, and I was going through my int quals, and they're like joking about the paper and like, oh, look at the gold golf course is on the paper. And I'm like, what? Like I wasn't even like qualified for that yet. So I saw a different side of them, which I think for me, I have a hard time. Like I was a kid in the Sea Org, and we had a lot of fun, even though when you look back, we were working 120-hour work weeks, sleeping under our desk for 4 days a week. And, the only time we'd be made to go home was when we were like smelled and we had to like change our clothes or something. But I mean, otherwise it was just like, we just did it, it was just.
But how old were you?
15, 16, 17 when I was. And
this goes back to, there's no judgment. There's no critical thing. Your brain's not even fully developed yet. You're 17 years old, Exactly. And this isn't any hit on you. This is everybody. Everybody who's 17, they don't know shit. Nobody who's 17 knows a goddamn thing. Let's just call a spade, right? So you're growing up, and you're immersed in this world of Scientology your entire life or most of your life. So, you're learning how to sell Dynetics books when you're 10 years old. The idea that you're going to question any of this is very far-fetched.
Right. I think the biggest emotional pull was my first plane trip I ever took was from San Francisco to Florida. And my dad bought me a one-way ticket. I think I covered this on Aaron's thing. He bought me a one-way ticket to Florida. And that was kind of my final straw of like, oh shit, like this is no joke. Like that's it. Like my dad doesn't want me here anymore. I have the Sea Org or I have nothing. And I remember making a conscious decision on that plane that I was going to do the best I could because I had no choice.
Right.
And when I got there, I'm thinking, like I said, I was going to be ethics bait. I was going straight to the RPF. I lied. I, told lies about going to class. And I get there and they're like, they did my life history. The only thing they wanted on my life history is like, do you have an open mind? And I was like, yes. And they're like, no, you don't. I'm like, oh, right. No.
No, I have a very closed mind. Yes, very closed.
It doesn't mean that. It means open, but it's closed. And you're like, okay, whatever, Right. And that was it. Like, sec checking was like, no big deal. All my clearances and all that were just like, yeah, oh, you grew up. Technically my grandfather was in it, but I don't call myself a third gen because I don't look at it that way because he dabbled. But my grandparents were in it. My dad was in it. My aunt and uncles were in it. So it was kind of just that, it was always around. So when I went there, it was like sink or swim. So I remember making that conscious effort to be the best I could be and do everything I could do to succeed.
Well, you didn't have a plan B.
No, especially
there was no escape plan for you.
There's no being 4,000 miles away from my only home, and knowing that my dad was the one that gave me the one-way ticket there. Yeah, there wasn't a plan B. It was definitely not. It was like, so, I mean, it tests the will of somebody, and again, I only realized that after I left. At the time, that was just a foregone conclusion. It was just how it was going to be.
Yep.
And, I remember contemplating on the bus back and forth to the birthing, wow, 1 billion years. Like, so this lifetime, okay, and then I'll have next lifetime. And I'm like, and then next lifetime. And then like, wow, and kind of coming to terms with that. It was funny because you mentioned about the Commodore's messengers or the kids, not formulating. The oldest guy in our org was Richard Franklin, and he was in ops, and he was like probably 28 at the time. And Cheryl DeChef had been our CO, but she left for INT or whatever. And then Tom and Jenny DeVock came in.
Oh, you worked with them.
Yeah, I worked with Tom he was our CO until I got recruited up to CST basically. But he was at the time, like, I think he's like 6 years older than I was. So he was like in his mid-20s. So Pilar Saldariaga, Peter Grafton, Gavin Potter, Allison Biggs.
Oh, Gavin Potter was there?
Gavin Potter was the preps briefing and firing director.
No shit.
And I was the COPE officer. So we manned missions like daily. At that time, Ron Norton was the captain FSO, and Debbie Cook was QualSec. Actually, she might have even been DFP at the time, the director of processing. So it was a whole different, and again, I went through and did all the INT quals missions to try to get people up to INT. So I knew everything. I'm like this young kid getting folders. I needed folder summaries from all their auditing, and I'd be like, oh my God, that guy has ants lick his balls. Oh my God. And I'd be walking down the street going, oh God.
Oh yeah, the stuff we used to read. Holy shit, man. Because just a note for everybody on this. Okay, so again, we're throwing a lot of terminology around, but basically Dylan, and I asked about a couple of those names because I knew those people when I was in the Sea Org later. And of course, Tom DeVock has come out. He has spoken on Leah's show. Debbie Cook has come out. She ended up in court with the church and ended up, making bank because they tried to prosecute her for violating her non-disclosure agreement, and she turned the tables on them big time.
Right.
And Ron Norton's out of the Sea Org now. He's still a Scientologist. So there's some of this, where are they now kind of stuff. But what Dylan was doing was he was right in the middle of a very hot area of Scientology at that time, and he was manning projects and these missions to go out and handle situations, and all these young people are just flying by the seat of their pants. They got all this energy and not a whole lot of intellect.
Right.
And they're getting orders and orders and orders and orders, and your whole day is just consumed in trying to get these orders complied with.
Absolutely. And that, as my job, I mean, you can probably figure out from my post title, what I did was I coped. That was the cope office. So I was right below the head of the division, who's the HCO chief or secretary, who's in charge of personnel of their org. But me, I was in charge of the missionary unit, manning missions, getting everything, the director of inspections and reports. I was going to say,
did you have to handle ethics also?
We had Gerhard Bauer at the time that did that. But he was an MAA, and then we had to pull some strings to get him to be the director of the department because, and like us, we weren't immune from missions either. We would get missions that would come in, and we'd all write our OWs, our overts and withholds up, and somebody'd have to be the bad guy and get a head on a pike. And what's funny with my story is I would usually be the first person to get in trouble. Like when those missions came, somebody'd write a KR on me, and it'd be like, oh, Dylan offered me a beer or something. And, ended up being a total, and that was a beer that had sat in our refrigerator from before I was even there.
Right.
And we were like, Gerhard, you need to get rid of this. And I handed it to him, and he's like, he wanted me to drink a beer. And I'm just like, what? And they don't care. They just need somebody to be that guy. So I'm like cleaning the CMO toilets, but then I would get through the ethics things fast. And like on those missions, I'd end up being the mission 3rd or 4th.
Right.
And so after this, everybody's still in ethics, and I'm on the mission giving people orders in my own org, you know, and collecting all the evidence for the targets getting done, you know?
Yep.
So
here's a good example, everybody, I just thought of this. Here's a good real world example of what it's like to be in a Scientology or a Sea Org organization and have a mission come in and start kicking ass. I'm going to give you the real world analogy for this. This is an old movie, but if anybody has ever seen Glengarry Glen Ross, and the scene where Alec Baldwin comes in, and Alec Baldwin won an Academy Award for a 5-minute scene in a movie, okay? And he comes in and he kicks ass. I mean, I'm not saying this in some kind of admirable way. He's a complete douche, but he comes in and he gives these salesmen at a sales company the what for. There's like 3 or 4 of them in there, you know, Kevin Spacey, Al Pacino, you know, various other actors, Jack Lemmon. And he tells them, one of you guys is getting fired tonight if you guys don't make sales. Mm-hmm. And that's the bottom line, right? And I'm here to enforce that. I'm here from senior management to kick your ass, get you guys into production. And I'm not here to sympathize with you. I'm not here to be a shoulder to cry on for you. I'm not here to tell you what a good salesman you are. I'm here to tell you, you make the sales or there's the door. Right. And that's his attitude. And it's a very, you know, kind of kick ass and take names attitude. That is a Sea Org mission. Absolutely. Exactly the way L. Ron Hubbard described it should run. And so Dylan's talking about, you know, even at the CMO, they were getting missions like that.
Absolutely.
You know, and he's, you know, the young innocent guy who's, you know, I gave somebody a beer, you know, like this is the kind of shit people are writing each other up for.
Right.
Like,
well, because we would spend days, like on one mission, we spent probably 10 days for our entire study time, which was 2.5 hours a day. Everybody was writing up overts and withholds, and nothing came up because we're really good people,
right?
Doing everything we could to get every order done, you know? Yep. And so finally they had to find some stupid little thing. And there we go. Now we found the why. Let's move on. You know, and it's like, poof, that's over with. And now we can go through our conditions. And yeah, it was, you know, I was on the opposite side of that too. I did a sit handling mission into PAC crew when Hayden James was the CO. And we got the whole org. It was Don, Jason, and I. And we flew from Flag to LA in the middle of the night. Mustered the org when we got there, the whole org, RPF, the commanding officer in front of the entire org, and put a new CO on post.
And that was Hayden James that you RPF?
And that was Hayden James.
Wow. Of course, he's out of the Sea Org now too. He's, you know, I think he's been on a show or two or something. I've seen him around, but
he's I worked with him a bit when I was in Colorado, and he still does the management technology kind of.
Okay, so you go out there, you kick ass and send this guy to the RPF. So interesting child experience there, or young adult, I guess I should say.
Right.
Because you're being brought up in this, and this is as for anybody who hasn't watched any earlier interviews, I'm sure most of you guys have. You know how intense this environment is, right? There's not a moment to rest. They're flying around in the middle of the night, waking people up and this kind of thing. This is just par for the course. This is just how the Sea Org is. And it was really wild in the 80s. It was pretty.
Oh, gosh. You know? Yeah, we would wake up Ron Norton, who's the captain flag crew or FSO, and be like, hey, we're manning this mission. You need to sign this right now. Like Gavin Potter and I. And we would go around. We manned like people that weren't supposed to be like class 12s, who are like the Uber auditors that audit like the most expensive processes in Florida, which are the L's, just to throw that out there for some more confusion. But the most expensive and so there was orders to never touch them, and we manned those people on missions. I mean, it was they would see us coming and people would just be like, oh God.
Yeah.
Because we go through and just, you're holding this post, you're doing that, you're coming with us and manning on the mission. It's like, holy crap.
Well, exactly. And it was, and this is just as a little, learning moment here. Like this is really demonstrative of how Scientology, or the Sea organization part of Scientology, really shoots themselves in the foot over and over again. Here you have two organizations. You have the flag service organization run by this guy named Ron Norton. He's the commander. His job is to make money. Money. Just pull it in just with a high-powered vacuum. That is his job. And his assets to do that are these high-trained powerhouse auditors in Scientology, these class 12 auditors who can deliver this special kind of auditing that costs like $10,000 for 12 and a half hours of auditing. Right. At this level. They're making big time money. And here come a couple kids, right? And the middle of the night, knocking on his door going, we're taking one of your high-powered auditors for one of our projects. And we, two little snot-nosed kids, never ran a service org, don't know really a whole lot about it, right, have their own orders, their own priorities that are coming down hard, and they're just going in and taking who they need, and there's nothing Ron Norton can do about it. And he's just... Except
for say, yes, sir.
Yeah, exactly. So he's like, you're taking, and he's making... And so there's this tension between these organizations inside of Scientology, and they're fighting at each other. And this is just, again, standard operating procedure. To this day, this is how Scientology operates.
Right. And even when Ron Norton got taken off post and sent up to INT, I was actually the messenger that drove him to the airport and, gave him like his basically, you're going up for cleanup. And we were good. The other side of that too is a lot of people, I got along quite well with Ron Norton. He was actually my friend on Facebook up until about 6 months ago when somebody must have ratted him out that I was declared or something. Wow. But I didn't comment on his thing. I just was like, because I considered him a friend. Like, there's a lot of people that I kind of saw through the crap and was tried to deal with more on a humanity kind of level. But Scientology policy, the way it is, you have to do that. And he still is definitely trying to do the public Scientology thing and do those networking. So, but yeah, you had there was a lot of, I think there was two kinds of people, and that kind of brings up the whole David Miscavige thing, is there were messengers and upper management that really believed and cared. And even though the policy was kind of ruthless, they chose to deal with it more in the spirit of the policy rather than the letter of the policy. And then there were people that were just downright ruthless and mean, and they would just smile while you got screwed. And even though they could say something to be like, hey, wait a minute, they would just let it happen. And they would make people call them sir. And I was never one of those messengers that was like a jerk.
Right.
At least I didn't think so. Because it was weird to feel that power. It was weird to walk into a room and have people kind of, boom or salute you. And, there's a flag order called Flag Order 38.
Right.
And it's an interesting, a lot of people interpreted it as, and the name of it's called etiquette.
Yep.
So to me, etiquette was like if somebody's walking up the stairs with a big, huge box in their hands, it doesn't matter whether you're a messenger or anything, you move out of the way, you don't stand in doorways, you don't, etiquette stuff. You look people in the eye. And a lot of people took that as like, you better call me sir or you're going to get written up, or I'm sending you to ethics, do you know who I am? And
yep.
I never really, it was always, I've always believed in that you're either like a player coach or you're kind of a my way or the highway coach. And so I've always believed that like, hey, if I can do it, you can do it, and I'll help you out, and yeah, I'm in this position, but I'm not trying to be like a tyrant this isn't tyranny. This is like, hey, we're all in the same boat, right? We're all trying to get this done. Let's all do it. And
Yep.
those people, you know, I don't know.
Do you think that, how do you think it broke down for you percentage wise, as far as those two types of people that from your experience in Florida?
Well, like, okay, so a good example is like Tom DeVock came in as the commanding officer for CMO, and he commanded a lot of presence, you know, but he was a nice freaking guy. Like, you talk to him and you're like, hey, I like this guy. This guy's cool. He makes sense. I want to do this for this guy. And then there was like Jenny DeVock, who was the deputy commanding officer internal. And she'd come in just screaming. Like, and I'm sure she had a lot of stuff coming down from her, but she did it through just fear and intimidation.
Right.
And so it was kind of, we had our other deputy commanding officer was a lady named Madge Johnson. Super nice girl, but she kind of did the fear and intimidation. Pilar Saldariaga, another one, kind of fear and intimidation, been there forever, like command 40 or tone 40, command intention. But for the most part, the rank and file at most orgs were good people, man. Like, they were, you know, really nice, good, caring people that they thought they were making the world a better place. And that was just happened to be our job at the time. Yep. I think that's what also brought, like, so when I got recruited to CST, I was in the CMO. We had no business taking apart our org because my wife at the time was the HCO chief. And she got taken first, and then I got taken right after her. So we just basically dismantled the personnel department in that org. And it wasn't just a simple matter of going directly to CST, which at the time, all I knew and all was told to me was called LRH Archives.
Right. They didn't call it CST or Church of Spiritual Technology.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
It was the Archive Project, or it was LRH Archives.
Okay.
And that's, even the CMO units thought it was LRH Archives. And there was actually a office in LA that was the archives office. And there was like one or two staff members, but they weren't even cleared to go to the actual base. They were just gathering any kind of masters, any kind of original documents around the PAC area. Okay. And then those would get shipped up to the actual main base of archives, right?
And by originals, you mean original copies of L. Ron Hubbard written issues, letters, directives, orders, anything.
Recordings, absolutely, or original masters.
Right.
A lot of the recordings, you couldn't get the original, or they were so deteriorated. So you had original masters, or I forget the terminology.
Copy masters.
Yeah, copy. There you go. And those were acceptable because that's all that was available.
Right.
Because everything else had been. But everything else, they were going for original. Like, even the issues that had XXXX on it were very suspect. They wanted to find the original handwritten, you know. So there was a big, of course, that was also the time when, and you were in PAC at this time, I think, when they, right behind Lebanon Hall, they had a couple semis that were always backed up that were full of documents. And those, do you remember all the vetting missions that were going on then?
The which missions?
The vetting. No,
I don't remember those.
So, this was like when the IRS, we were still trying to get tax exempt status.
Okay. What year are we talking about?
Late 88, mid 89.
Okay. I had gone down for training in 87, 88 to PAC, and I was down there for about 4 months. And then I went down again at the end of 1988. And I was down there for 88, 89 for about 4 months.
So that would have been the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And part of that time I earned money for my room and board because my org Santa Barbara was so broke ass. They weren't paying for anything for me. So I did proofreading for LRH book compilations, which was another unit.
Right. The comps, LRH comps. And was that through Bridge?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought. Well, there was two semis. And so the big fear at the time, so I went from CMO in Flag, which was called CMO Clearwater, to CMO International Extension Unit.
Okay.
While I was getting my clearances to go up to LRH Archives.
To go up to archives, okay.
So
and when we talk about going up, we mean going up the organizing board, up the command structure. That's what we're talking about. And
right.
Physically speaking, we're talking about going to a confidential location. So you're getting all these clearance activities on you, and you don't even know where you're going.
Oh, no clue at all. Yeah, no, we just knew that we were selected for a project, and that we were taking, I mean, obviously it was important because we were taken out of the biggest priority org and area to go there.
Yep.
So it was something that was like, oh my God, this must be huge. And honestly, you don't even have the time to think about that, because I got there, I'm doing clearances. They're making me redo my Purif. I think I had to do my CCRD, which was the Clear Certainty Rundown, because all I'd ever received in the Sea Org was FPRD auditing.
Okay.
And which is the false purpose rundown, which is basically like a all lifetime sec check.
Right.
And in that, I accidentally originated the clear cognition. And because I just was like, I'd gone through all this past life crap, and one day I was just like, I get it. Like, I'm totally here, and and they were just like, wait a minute. And they couldn't get me back in session because I was like, my needle was just, and I was just happy. And I'm just like, I'm just doing it, you know, like I love my friends. I love it. And they're just like, shit. So they had me do that. They had me do some auditing stuff to try as part of my clearances, basically.
Yep.
It's
basically clearances mean that they are trying to make sure that the qualifications are being met for
right.
you to go up the line. And the qualifications just become more and more stringent the higher up you go, which is why it takes time to do these clearances. And most of the clearances consist of auditing or mostly sec checking. They're asking you, have you done this bad thing? Have you done this other bad thing? You know, what about this over here? Did you do anything like this? And they're asking you all these very, very personal, invasive questions to get what kind of bad stuff you've been up to. The idea being not necessarily that they're assuming that you're guilty. They just want to check and make sure that there's no skeletons in your closet, that you're not that you're withholding, that they feel that they need to know about before they send you up the line. And they're mostly concerned about security leaks or people who have ill intentions toward L. Ron Hubbard or David Miscavige, that kind of thing. That's what they're looking for.
And really, it's funny because all the messengers and stuff had already, been through that so many times. I found we were really dealing with crap that I had been doing in the Sea Org. Like, it wasn't stuff others. It was like, okay, well, you falsely reported. And I'm like, well, maybe not. And like, so it was like stuff like that they just kept going over. And I think Mike Gilchrist was actually my sec checker for a long time. But at the same time, I was doing a ton of missions because I was a fully trained missionaire. And I had done over like 30 or 40 successful missions when I was in Clearwater. So IXU caught hold of. Well, I did missions into the Diana. I did the Diana was like 6 miles from Flag, and nobody knew about it. It was like totally confidential. And I had to get almost cleared to do this stupid project to go see if it was even able to be refit.
The Diana was a little boat, right?
Yeah, it was a little boat, small boat, 15 or 20 feet long, but yeah, it was little. Right. But it was dry docked, and it was, what's weird is they were thinking about getting rid of it. And this was part of the original armada of the Sea Org, and it's that's where you kind of, looking back, you realize that David Miscavige was already trying to kind of erode away that stuff and stamp his own name in. Yep. And, but so I was doing missions for CMO IXU, and one of the missions I did, it was actually, there's missions and then there's projects. Yep. And then there's observation missions. Mm-hmm.
Why don't you explain what the difference is between those?
So an observation mission is you work with the division called Ops Bureau, which is the Operations Bureau, and they basically go off of what's called the data series. And when they're doing an eval of an area or an evaluation of an area as to why their stats crashed or there's problems, they can make little projects where you go out and gather data to give them more info for their evaluation so they can complete it. And that's basically an ops mission.
Yeah.
A project is basically a little like going up to check out the Diana to see if it's worthy to be it's like some order that came down. And so the Operations Bureau is like, okay, we got to do a little project and go check this out. And then it goes to Action Bureau, and Action Bureau mans the mission, sends it out. And then they go, okay, do your little targets and this and that. And then there's sit handling missions. And sit handling missions are based on completed and approved evals that have been sent up lines and approved, and then now have actionable things that need to be done to handle the area.
Right. Sit handling meaning situation handling.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So these were like a bunch of projects that we were doing in PAC. And at the time, it was, even when you're on the mission, they don't give you all the data. So there was all these vetting missions, and all these missions were to go through all this paperwork from a specific time, which was when LRH got off the lines, to current. And we had to delete and physically cut out with razor blades anything that would have shown that he was giving direct orders to any Scientology entity.
Right.
In preps for the audit that was coming for sure. Scientology was so paranoid that the IRS was going to audit them because they knew they had dirty hands. Yep. They knew that LRH knew that he was on the lines. And so there was this, it goes in conjunction with, a lot of people have heard the all clear, where they're trying to get LRH to not be in hiding anymore. And that's like DM and Marty Rathbun's big purpose in life. And most of the Sea Org was occupied with them getting the all clear so he could come back. Well, this was part of it.
Right. This was still when Hubbard was still alive?
No.
This was after.
This was when they're trying to get tax exempt status.
Right. And this is still when the conflict and the war is still going full steam, head to head. There's no agreements. There hasn't been a meeting yet. God, no. David Miscavige hasn't met with the IRS commissioner. It's still war.
It's still a chess game, basically. Yep. It's still like, okay, here's what they're going to do. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to cover our ass and make sure that there's nothing. And they were going to basically give them like 3 or 4 semi trucks full of paper and be like, go ahead and audit us, And it's like, wait a minute, this will take us 10 years to go through.
Yeah.
And all of it would be like cheese paper. It'd just be like vetted holes everywhere. So anybody that referred to source, referred to where he was, or any of that stuff was getting cut out. So I did a bunch of missions running and making sure the right personnel were there to vet stuff that had the right clearances. So you not only had to go through the stuff, you couldn't show them where Crestline is. You had to have people that had clearances or people that didn't, and then separate the paper so that they could vet certain stuff, and then other people could vet certain stuff. And
I imagine that was not an easy task, because how many people were in PAC who had clearances to go up lines?
Yeah, barely. I mean, even all of CMO was supposed to be cleared, but they had been rifled through as well. So, I mean, like half of them had clearances.
Right.
So
this is just the kind of misorganization and nonsense that goes on every day in Scientology that makes life difficult for Sea Org members.
Absolutely. Yeah. No,
yeah, but it answers the question, what do we do all day? This is the kind of shit.
Exactly. Just not, and it's all most important thing in the world until Thursday, and then let's start it all again. It was every week. It was just this monumental, oh my God, this is what is going to save the planet or not.
Right.
Like that was the estimation of effort. They use words like.
Did you ever question what was going on during any of this?
No, I don't think so. You know, it's funny because I did my Purif in LA, and I used to run up to Griffith Park every day and back.
Mm-hmm.
I could have ran anywhere I wanted, but I ran back every single day. You know, and
Right.
to me, it wasn't even a question. It wasn't even, I didn't even question leaving. I didn't even question it until much later. You know, and when I did get my clearances and went up to CST, it was like, oh my God, I finally reached this great place. I finally reached like utopia, kind of like we are really, this is what it's all about. Like there were still Hiltons and still orders up the yang and weird like DM changing shit. And my weekly reports went through ASI. I think as you go up higher, you realize the structure a lot more.
Yep.
And you realize like, oh, this is how it all works, you know?
Right.
And it doesn't change how you look at stuff. It just changes kind of your perspective on things. You know, I'm dealing with like Terry Gamboa, Norman Starkey. I'm dealing with, you know, Shelley Miscavige all the time, every day. I'm dealing with David Miscavige on a weekly basis, like in person or in writing. I'm dealing with him on a daily basis on telexes and Mercs, you know? And
so let's talk about this, because I've got tons of questions for you about this thing now. Okay. So you get cleared to go from LA up to CST. You're dealing with these guys on a daily basis now. You're literally like rubbing elbows or interacting with the senior people of Scientology. Did you realize that was the situation, the position you were in at that point?
Well, when I got there, my wife, who was Bronwyn Bolger originally, was the HCO chief there. She got posted as the HCO, same as in Clearwater. And I think I expedited in that division for about a week or so. And then I replaced Bruce Bolstad, who was Maureen Bolstad's husband, as the estate sec. So in this org, our division of delivery was building buildings. So I was like in charge of the tech division, which was building buildings. And we had, or the estates division, which was 3. And then we had a 3A, which was all our external. Division 4 was the archival, and Division 5 was still qual.
Okay.
But yeah, archives was the division.
So let's explain this a little bit, just so people are clear, because you know, a lot of the organizations of Scientology are directly delivering services, auditing or training to public people. There are city level churches, and then you have the Sea Org level organizations that are service organizations like Flag in Clearwater or ASHO in Los Angeles, and they deliver higher level services. But this CST isn't up there delivering any services. Public don't even know it exists.
Right.
They're up there, and their estates area is building these archive projects, these tunnels in the ground that are holding all these vaults that are holding all these archived materials. That's what you were in charge of. Right.
And it's for the first bit, even when I was posted as the estate sec, I didn't even know there was external other bases besides the current base. And it was very compartmentalized even at that level. You know, we had, and I was actually replacing, so in our entire estates division, we had the estate sec and a cook, and that was it.
Wow.
That was everybody. That was the whole estates division.
Okay.
The cook you couldn't screw with because she cooked for the whole base, so she was pretty much untouchable. Most thankless job you'll ever want in your life. But I went and replaced Bruce Bolstad, who was the former estate sec, who was going to the RPF as soon as he finished turning his hat over to me.
Wow. Okay.
And he knew it.
So he was basically getting kicked off the job in disgrace.
Yes.
Okay.
But he was able to turn over his hat because there was so many things going on, or his job title,
Right.
or his job.
Turning over your hat means turning over your job and all your pending projects to somebody else. That is extremely rare. Usually when somebody goes to the RPF, they're just gone. Just boom, where'd they go? They're gone.
Exactly.
So that's quite, he must have had a lot of stuff on his plate to have to turn it over.
Well, we were building at the time, I took over, we hadn't completed the storage facility, the underground vault at that base yet. It was in progress. The LRH house was about halfway done. We had an exec log cabin that was being built that was just starting. The wood hadn't even been shipped in. We had all the little cabins. Like if you ever seen a video of CST, you see the main gate, you can see all the little houses up there. Those had just been built when I got there.
Oh, okay.
And those were
so this was at the current location where we've seen the drone footage.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. That's where you were.
That's the main CST base. That's the headquarters for CST.
And how many staff?
At the time, there was 14, I think, when I got there. So 15, but then Bruce left and it was 14 again. And then, so 14 to 16-ish coming, for people leaving and coming. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then there were more, but we didn't know about those yet because there was external people that were out in external bases that we had no idea about. Right. So it was kind of a little bit of a I didn't even realize that half my division I didn't even know about, basically. Yeah.
When he turned all that over to you, he did not turn over that part?
No,
because you weren't cleared to find out about it yet.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. I think it was like a probationary period because after about 3 months, I was sat down by the commanding officer for CST, with a guy named Russ Bellin. And he sat me down in the dining hall and showed me all the advices for CST and how it became a project and what the intention was behind it and the symbols and a bunch of stuff like that. And then I got told about the external divisions, and subsequently then I ended up going out to New Mexico and Petrola, and I ended up going out to these different bases that we had at the time. And that's right when we were actually acquiring Crestline, the old LRH residence, which was never meant to be an archival facility. It was just meant to be, it was given to us as property.
Okay.
So I learned a lot more about that.
I'm sorry, did you say that there was a vault at that location?
No.
Okay, there was not. Okay.
No, and there's never, unless that changed, that was never intended to be a vault site.
Okay.
It was intended to be just an LRH, like, historical site, basically. It wasn't intended to have a vault there.
Okay. What, and the CST location?
No, the main CST location definitely had a vault.
Oh, it does have a vault.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think when Tony Ortega he got that footage, he didn't send me the video, but he sent me stills because I think he didn't want me to, I don't know. But he wouldn't send me the video. He just sent me stills, and he asked me to name all the buildings on the main site, which is up in Lake Arrowhead or Crestline or Twin Peaks. It has a bunch of different names. We kind of referred to it as Twin Peaks or Crestline because that's where we go a lot. But it was known as the Lake Arrowhead compound or base.
And that's the main CST facility, and that's where you worked.
Right. It was interesting when I got first sent up there, all my Sea Org clothing and everything was left there. I wasn't able to take it with me. Okay. Because we didn't wear Sea Org uniforms. We wore jeans with button-up shirts and cowboy boots was our uniform.
Cowboy boots?
Yeah, cowboy boots.
Are you serious?
Yeah, absolutely. And they were pink shirts, like pink button-up shirts.
What?
They might have changed them from then. I hope they did. But it was
pink shirts.
It was the whole idea to not be affiliated with Sea Org or Scientology. It was a big deal. And part of that was because of the whole tax exemption thing going on.
Okay.
They were really trying to be, and later finding out that Russ Bellin, Jane McNairn, and I think Sarah Bellin at the time were on the list of trustees for the Church of Spiritual Technology, with a few lawyers, Lyman Spurlock, a few other guys. And those changed a little bit as people left and came into the fold and stuff like that. But we held all the original trademarks and copyrights for CST or for Scientology, and those were leased to RTC for like $1 or something. And there's a policy in Scientology. I don't know if it's a HCO policy letter or if it's an advice, but I remember it being called like the umbrella policy or something, where after the Larry Wollersheim case, the one thin dime case, I don't know if you remember that.
Oh yeah.
I did like OTTR0 on a building forever, like in San Francisco when they did that, when I was like super young. And after that, like he almost took down, at that time it was called the Church of California, or Church of Scientology California.
Yes,
I think
that was the Church of Scientology California was one of the original Scientology organizations going all the way back to the 50s. Right. And it was the main financial hub of Scientology for many, many, many years. Exactly.
So what happened was inadvertently was that Larry Wollersheim sued that entity and almost took down the entire organization.
That's right.
So immediately after that, like Scientology is kind of sneaky and deceptive, and those stupid little wogs, they decided to make umbrella corporations. And that's when like Wise, Able, all those little pink, pink, pink started popping up.
Yep.
So you couldn't sue one entity. And that sort of plays into CST, RTC, Gold, all these different groups, Bridge, they're all their own entities. So if you have a problem and you sue one, you might take that down, but you don't touch the whole organization. You just touch one little small part of it.
That's right.
And I think that's what a lot of people with their conspiracy theories don't understand, is that it's done intentionally. There's not some lawyers running the thing, collecting money, and it's David Miscavige is running, or whoever would have taken those reins is running that. And that's policy. That's not their brainchild. They're not that smart to figure that shit out. But that's
what they hired the lawyers for.
Absolutely. And I think that's subsequently why it became policy is, okay, look, you don't want to get destroyed in one fell swoop. Well, make a bunch of little entities and do all these little things. And that's kind of where all that came from. So when I was up there, that's sort of what I understood it as, was like, because I'm getting direct orders from David Miscavige like daily. But we're technically all above him.
Did that ever bother you? Did you ever wonder how is this little guy giving me orders when I'm here and he's there?
Absolutely not. I think the reason why is we were doing it for a higher purpose, and these unenlightened humans that don't know anything, we're just telling them what they want to hear. So it's like that whole ha ha ha, nudge nudge, wink wink thing of like, there was no doubt that David Miscavige was COB. You didn't even refer to him as David Miscavige. You referred to him as COB in the Sea Org.
Right. So by the time you got up there, his position was already solidified as that. There was no questioning David Miscavige about anything.
Well, and the fact that I was a messenger during that time. So it was like, it was already, WDC CMO. We were programmed. That's, I think, why they put a lot of those people up there.
Right.
Was because, and it was weird because not everybody there were messengers. So I was told before I got up there that your messenger status no longer applies. And for me, knowing all the messenger orders, I was like, that's interesting. So there was like little SO number 1, this and that, like all these little things that were like, that's strange. Even though I'd been raised in it, these were direct like policy these are direct contradiction to the purpose of what I was doing.
Right.
So I think those kind of eventually built up a little bit to where I kind of started thinking, well, this is what I'm doing, but it's kind of strange that there's all these like inconsistencies, you
Right.
know?
Right.
And
That's
so,
how it starts, is you're just like, well, this is weird, but I don't have time to think about this right now. I just got to get my work done.
Yeah. And when we got up there, it was the first time I ever got bonuses. It was the first time I actually ever got paid all the time. And so there were some perks to being, I got like Christmas, I got a $400 bonus. $400.
For the Sea Org, that is extremely generous.
And they let us go down to the San Bernardino Mall and spend it.
What?
We were like, wow, 2 hours.
Wow. Talk about pampered privilege in the Sea Org, man. I'm not kidding.
We got Mont Blanc pens one year with our initials on it.
Wow.
Yeah, it was the bomb.
How many years did you work at CST?
I was there for almost 4 years.
Okay, so you probably covered this with Aaron. It was a long interview, but tell me, succinctly, I suppose, but as best you can, what was the purpose of CST according to those advices? You are literally the only person I have ever spoken to who has read those.
Yeah, apparently a couple other people have, but I think they've read them. Like a few ASI staff read them. Apparently Tom DeVox said he's read them, but I don't know how he did. He said he's been on the base too, which I'm not quite so sure about. But either way.
You mean the CST base?
Yeah, which was, one of the expressed things was that nobody from INT would go to the base. Like David Miscavige didn't come to the base all the time. But
he did come when he wanted to.
No, when I was there, he never came to the base.
Oh, he never came to the base.
No, it wasn't even like the whole, and I think a lot of it was because of the tax, because CST was also trying to get tax exemption.
Okay.
And Scientology was trying to get tax exemption at the same time.
Okay.
So there wasn't supposed to be a lot of intermingling of it. My weekly reports were in briefcases. We took Polaroids and put captions, typed out captions on the bottom, and we had photo albums for every building project we had. Yep. And they were hand routed. They weren't mailed. They were hand routed to ASI, and then from ASI they were hand routed up to INT, to his office. Okay. So we were also doing a microwave communications thing at the time, so that INT and CST could communicate on a private network through microwave rather than be able to be intercepted. So there was a lot of attention being paid to keep it very, very separate.
Okay.
And very, very, even though at the time, Tom Vorm and Russ Bellin were going to overseas to get the time capsules done, they were also working on the Mark 8s. But that was like a whole hush thing because it was conflict of interest and weird shit like that. So
that's right. Oh no, big time. Because the CST is supposed to be, well, as I understand it, from a legal perspective, they own all those copyrights and trademarks of Scientology, but they don't deliver any Dianetics or Scientology. Hell, most Scientologists don't even know it exists. So how could you ever sue it out of existence? They're not up there doing anything. They just own those copyrights and lease them to this other organization, RTC.
What's just funny about that is most Sea Org members don't know it exists, but almost all public did know it exists because ASI was selling them all these gold-bound and hardcover books for the LRH archive project.
Well, they knew about LRH archives, but they didn't know about Church of Spiritual Technology.
Oh, right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it was like, remember I was talking about FSO Programs Ops and WDC FSO. Yep. I had 2 logons when I was at CST. I had EstateSec CST and EstateSec LRH archives.
Oh.
So I could send messages as EstateSec CST to certain people, and then everybody else, like if we were trying to find stuff or talk to people in PAC or estates, I'd have to send it as EstateSec LRH archives.
See, that's what I'm talking about. This is a perfect example of that compartmentalization, even within one organization.
Right. Exactly.
It's got its own internal face and its external face, which is it's a facade. It's a whole different thing,
Well, there was half the staff, when I got told about the other locations, we didn't share that with the other staff. Like all the staff at CST didn't even know we had other vault locations or anything. It was all right there.
Isn't that amazing?
It was weird. It was a weird, and I think part of the explanation of it was that the external sites weren't ever meant to be inhabited unless there was like a big apocalyptic event or anything.
Oh, so the idea was they were going to be built and then it was going to be hands off.
Well, there's supposed to be a caretaker there.
Okay, caretaker. Okay.
Ideally a couple or just one person, but no more than 2 people were ever supposed to be there. And even everything that would be done maintenance-wise would be done either by outside contractors. It's kind of how the New Mexico vaults got built locally by contractors, same as the archives in Lake Arrowhead got built by local contractors. Same as Petrola in Northern California. That's exactly, everything was built by local contractors with 1 or 2 people overseeing everything there.
Right.
So it was very compartmentalized. And you know what's even more compartmentalized is we didn't go out and scout the locations out. They were given to us. We didn't have any control by the Inn Landlord's office and by RTC. That's who went and found. We didn't go and find perspective, the Lady Washington mine, any of that stuff. We didn't have any part of going out and procuring new property.
See, that's semi-interesting to me. That's kind of because
I know, isn't that weird?
It is kind of weird because what the hell is RTC and landlord office doing with that stuff? They're not even supposed to know about it.
Right. Well, of course they know about it because they're given the copyrights and blah, blah, blah. But
well, yeah, I mean RTC, sure, but landlord office?
Well, and I'm sure that was directly run. I mean, it was probably one person in Int Landlord that knew that did that and worked. So it's like when the RTC reps kind of came out and bypassed everybody.
Yeah.
Like I'm sure it was a very similar, like, okay, you have to do this. And even in ASI, which was highly, highly qualled, only certain, like Norman Starkey knew everything. The CO ASI knew everything. And that was about it. Like not too many other ASI people knew anything about, and that's who funded everything at CST. That was one of the express purposes of ASI was to fund all of the CST along with SO number 1.
Right. Because the church money, the service money, and the IAS money keeps the Church of Scientology International running.
That's right.
It's not about feeding that money to archives or to ASI.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Even though those payments end up going and getting funneled that way. Anyways.
Well, sure, some money.
So, right.
Yeah.
So
Because I know from what I've seen in writing that when ASI and CST were very first formed, if I remember correctly, and I might be wrong about this, but there was an initial loan of money or an initial payment of money from Scientology to these organizations to it was like seed money is kind of how I imagined what I was looking
at. Well, the original, I was part of the second manning of it. So there was the LRH Archives Project, and it was done as kind of like a garrison mission, which is the only other mission we didn't cover. A garrison mission is basically a mission that turns into a job.
It's like a permanent mission. Yeah.
It starts out as a project and it pretty much turns into what you're doing for the rest of your life or for the foreseeable future. And that's what the LRH Archives Project started as and then turned into an actual entity and got formed that way.
Right.
So the advices were pretty much as described, other than, and what was described is basically preserving the technology for all time.
Okay.
And for mankind. And it was, everything that we did there was to be as long as humanly possible at the time. What we could do to make facilities that would last as long as possible. That's why the containers were done. That's why the fireproof blankets. That's why, every area had a different, I think Petrola and the main base were very similar in how they were built, which was corrugated tubing and then earth over it, where New Mexico was built into a mountain and tunneled in, and then limestone slurry and, stuff like that. So it was to use the means of the area so that you could make a facility to preserve the technology for as long as humanly possible. And, 500 years, 1,000 years were kind of the goals of that, were like, in case something happens, and in this time it'll be, and everything like Nakamichi dragons are in those vaults, reel to reels. Nakamichi dragon is the approved cassette decks to play LRH archives.
Got it.
LRH lectures. Okay. Those are the decks. So, we reached out to Nakamichi and got these things and archived them. And so there's all these approved things. There's reel to reel, there's discs, there's albums, there's record player. I mean, that was a big thing, was like, there's not just one source of media, there's multi-source. And then we of course had to be true to policy still. So it wasn't like you could just be like, oh, we're going to use CD. Well, we use CD technology too, but you had to use the approved players. You couldn't just find the newer player. You got to use what LRH said. It's like rainbow vacuums, right? It's
right.
Like,
or telexes.
Right, or telexes, or it's kind of it's that whole, some things you just couldn't change. And what's interesting about this season of Leah Remini's show is Tom DeVock touched on something just very happenstance that for me, I was like, yeah, duh. But I didn't realize that not everybody didn't realize it, in that when I was a messenger, it was a foregone conclusion that LRH was coming back. Like, we knew that it was all kind of like, yeah, well, he went off to Target 2, and that wasn't the end of the story. It was that he's going to come back. And honestly, I kept thinking back, I'm like, God, I don't know if that was policy, if it was just rumor or whatever. But when I got to CST, it was part of the advices that our job was to caretake a young LRH if he came back. And I remember being...
I want to know everything about that. Tell me everything you know about that.
Well, I mean, there wasn't like, that's how we built the houses so that he would have a support structure there. Like, we built him not with like a nanny place, but like there would be a complement of messengers, like almost like it would be almost like when he was on the ship, he would have his complement of people to expedite all his stuff. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't that he was going to come back and have to remember. He would already be the sentient being.
Right.
But I remember thinking like there'd be this like 11-year-old kid that would walk up to the gates and be like, "Hey, I'm here," and we'd be like, "Okay, come on in," and it'd be like.
Did he describe any kind of protocol or procedure of coming back?
No, it was very general, and that okay. Looking back at it now, I've actually done a bit of like digging to people that were at ASI that have read certain advices, just to try to clarify if those were in fact written by LRH, or if they were written for LRH, or if they were written to be passed as LRH.
Right.
And the reason why I say that is all of the messenger orders, they weren't written by LRH. They were written by Janice Grady, actually.
No shit.
For LRH.
Now, when you say the messenger orders, are you talking about the special CMO issues?
Yeah, all the CMO issues.
Like the CMO TRs and all that kind of stuff?
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, and that's funny. That's funny. She wrote all of them?
She wrote a majority of them, her and another watch messengers, and they were for him as signed by him.
Right.
So she did all the groundwork, and he said, "Yep," thunk, and written by founder LRH, because it says LRH founder on it. Like, he wrote it. Like, he's the guy in the room that's typing more. I remember hearing and telling people all my life, was like, do you know how much stuff LRH wrote? It would fill this entire house. It would fill like hundreds of filing cabinets, legal size filing cabinets, not just a 2-drawer, a 4-drawer, and hundreds of them. And then you start to piece this stuff together. It was like, wait a minute, written.
Yeah.
So to me, and then later going, being out and going through what I went through and then kind of coming back into this fold, I started piecing, a lot of things with Scientology. To put it in perspective, you really need to take time and dates seriously, because it means a lot in the evolution of Scientology and how it was.
Yep.
Even on how a lot of his policies were written. The sign of the times and the days of like, how could LRH call black people Negroes and da-da-da? And it's like, well, that's what they did in the 50s and 40s. And that doesn't make it okay. And I'm absolutely against that. And I am pro-humanity. I believe people are all the same color. I don't think skin matters at all. But it mattered back then. Mm-hmm. It was important back then. And that's where a lot of these things can be taken. We're taking it in 2019 text, and it was written in 2050 text, and you got to take that into account. So with that in mind, the whole evolution of Scientology and the Sea Org really takes on a different perspective. And then you take on these personalities that were there. For a good example is in the 80s, David Mayo was the Antichrist.
Right.
And you're like, oh my, as a young messenger, I was like, oh my God, anything you read about. But then you'd read these advices that are like, it almost was like it was LRH's best friend.
Exactly. Because he was.
Right.
Until the day he wasn't.
Exactly. And but that's important. And the only way you can really start to decipher that stuff is when you start putting it into date order.
Yep.
I remember reading it and I'd be like, wait a minute, isn't this the evil guy that in the Est and oh my God, and he created this and he did that, oh my, and then I'm like, they look like they're best buds from this org. And that's where, like with Flag, it had a lot of rich history from the Sea Org because of all the flag orders and the Oods that were there, the orders of the day.
Yep.
And those told a different story than what he wanted presented in the 70s and when they did policy and they started writing all those policies you talked about. So that has to be applied throughout Scientology, even with CST, even with CMO, even with all that stuff. When they did the whole command restructures, like when they did Flag Command Bureau and Flag Bureau, and then nobody in the Sea Org knew about the frickin' Snow White project or what happened to Mary. You didn't know about that unless you were not in Scientology. Then you might have known about it. But if you were in, you didn't know anything about that crap. It was all kept completely secret. So dates are huge. And so I did a lot of digging into the advices because it started to not make sense to me. There's my wife. It started to really, it made me wonder whether it was written by him or written for him or written on his behalf. And at the time, I think it's kind of a mixture of all three, because I don't think he was in the mid 80s is when I think a lot of the advices were written in like 82, 83. And then the LRH first project was like 84, 85. And so when you look back at his actual history, he wasn't in any position per like Steve Fife, who rest his soul, was around him at the time. LRH was in some bad shape. He was like fighting body thetans and demons and having all this problems. So how would he have this wherewithal to start this project other than let's take things we do know, I want to stamp my name in history for all mankind.
Exactly. Well, I believe because of the fact that was L. Ron Hubbard's longest term, lifelong goal. Mm-hmm. Going all the way back to the Helen letter and whatever other journal entries he might have made as a kid or young man. This business of stamping his name into history was not a small thing. This was a life goal L. Ron Hubbard had. Right. So I think for that reason alone, I'm sure some of those advices have to be L. Ron Hubbard's own words.
I think the spirit of them but the letter of them, I don't think so.
Okay.
And the reason why is it's like so you take David Miscavige, who everybody's like, oh well, he's a tyrant and he's this and he's doing his own thing. No, he really thinks he's doing the work of LRH. He really thinks he's doing it. I honestly I cannot not think that. I think he realizes that. I mean, even the stuff I heard about Pat Broker and him going to Vegas and spending money and then still bringing some of it to the old man and stuff, that was rampant in Scientology. That was always rampant. People were still going to be humans, but they're still kind of embracing the spirit. I'm still doing the what is going to save the planet. And they believe that. So
you think these two ideas can exist concurrently?
I do, absolutely.
Okay.
I think when you're in a position, it's like Simon Bolivar, right? It's like what an exec wants on his lines. When you're in a position of power, what do you have to do to keep that position of power? And that's part of like it. Almost anything's justified to keep that position of power. So purpose is senior, right? So if purpose is senior, as long as you keep that purpose and you think everything you're doing is on purpose or will eventually end up with that outcome, you can justify doing any. What does Simon Bolivar say? You can kill people, you can lie, you can, I mean, there. And then you take in the data series who has all the, like the data series is thick in the Art of War. And if you read the Art of War and then you apply Simon Bolivar to that, well, there's nothing that's out of bounds. You can almost justify anything and still be.
Yeah, I mean, it's very Machiavellian.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Well put, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh.
Assassination, taking out your enemies. Nobody cares. That's exactly
infiltrating the government.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, we know for a fact Scientologists don't give a shit what WOGs have to say. So, or WOG laws or WOG this or WOG that. And I know that this is a derogatory term. I know I'm using a very derogatory term right now. This is the word Scientologists use. That's why I'm using it. I'm not throwing this word around because I enjoy, or I'm trying to denigrate whole classes of people. That's what Scientologists do. And that's what we used to do when we were in Scientology.
Well, I think it's twisted. It's not like it seems like this arrogant, like, well, it is kind of like we're better than you, but it's like we're doing it for your own good.
That's right.
Because you don't, and that's the nuance that gets missed. It's not this arrogant, oh, the WOGs and the WOGs. It's like, you guys are unenlightened, but we aren't. So we're helping you. And even though you don't know you need help, we do. Right. And we're going to help you anyways, whether you like it or not. And we can do anything to do that. And there's nothing off the table because what's at stake? Man's salvation.
That's right.
The world.
That's right. It's very, it's almost parental in approach.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's that kind of attitude, Clearly we know more than you guys. And you guys are just a bunch of deceived boobs. And so we're going to lift you up with us. And if you're going to fight us, we're going to knock you out of the way,
Right. Well, we'll get you next lifetime.
Yeah.
And that's really what it is. And the other thing about that is I came to a kind of a conclusion not too long back, but like everybody talks about operating thetans and this and that, and like why people get, Scientology is a very selfish religion. It's very I, me. When you're public, it's all about the I and the me.
Yep.
And what can I get? Where can I go? Where am I on the bridge? What is your case level? That kind of thing. If you really want to know what an operating thetan is to Scientology, look at any Sea Org member. Because when you get off the EPF or the Estates Project Force and you've done your staff statuses, your first stable datums that get repeated to you over and over is no case on post, no human emotion reaction, and make it go right.
That's right.
And if you want to know
those are OT. That's what it means to be OT.
Right. And it's like everything. It's like Dianetics with the volcano on the front. You're re-stimulating. Like if it was that important, you wouldn't intentionally re-stimulate people, but it's kind of a joke. And it's as much as the Sea Org and Scientologists look at WOGs that way, LRH looked at everybody who's in the Sea Org and Scientology that way.
Yep.
It's like, oh, I'm dangling this carrot in front of you, and actually all these guys are already what I already said.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's that mind.
Let's get back to Miscavige for a second, because I don't know if I want to argue with you about this or not. I'm curious what your position is on this. You received direct orders and communication from him for years.
Yeah. I mean, it was, pretty. I mean, you get everything was approved, but yeah, he would see a weekly report and then comment directly. He had no problem commenting directly.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure he didn't. I have taken up a position that, and I've said this many times, that I do not believe that David Miscavige is a true believer in Scientology at this point. Right. I believe that he might have been at one time back in his past. I think he was honest when he said that he thought it had cured his asthma as a kid. Even though it didn't cure it, it came back. But, it relieved it to some degree. I think he honestly pursued becoming an auditor, but his temperament was such that he was not able to really do a very good job of being an auditor. There's that story about him slapping one of his PCs.
Yeah, in St. Helens.
He rose in the ranks of Scientology directly under L. Ron Hubbard. He observed how L. Ron Hubbard treated people. He mimicked that behavior, the very worst of that behavior most of the time.
Right.
And I think that he thought that Scientology tech worked until he saw behind the curtain. I think it was somewhere around the time that OT8 happened. This is purely subjective on my part, just my opinion. But I think that he saw the debacle that was OT8 and the whole issue with the LRH saying he was the Antichrist and all that. And I think he went, whoa, something's really wrong here. Now, also, of course, David Miscavige never made it to OT8.
Right.
Going through OT7. So what the hell is he reading that material for in the first place? He knew he shouldn't have been doing that, but he did it anyway. So that's where I think he started getting the idea that it wasn't really all what it was cracked up to be. I mean, how could you watch L. Ron Hubbard die the way that he did and think that L. Ron Hubbard was the savior of mankind, right?
Well, I think the difference here that I'm picking up on is, what do you really think a true believer in this is?
I think it's somebody who really believes in Thetans.
The tech?
The technology is the only technology that will rehabilitate Thetans and create powerful states of existence called operating Thetan states.
Right.
That's what I think is a true believer. I think it's somebody who looks at that bridge to total freedom and says, I want to do those services because I want those abilities. And if I do those services and I do them in this order, I will get what L. Ron Hubbard is promising me I will get. That's what I think a true believer is. And I don't think David Miscavige is that.
And with that definition, I agree.
Okay.
Except for I don't think that's what a true believer is.
Well, yeah, tell me what you think.
I think I kind of liken it to like a medicine man who, like the placebo effect, a little bit of like a world without crime and a world without, hate and war. It doesn't mean everybody has to be OT. It doesn't mean, it kind of does when you're trying to sell them that. And that's the elixir of like, going, what is the Rolling Stones, going to the shelter of his mother's little helper, or like it's that whole, like, this elixir is going to help you feel better and be better. Like, we're all connected as humans. And I think I'm selling you this piece of thing that's going to make you be a better human. And yeah, I might promise you stuff. And I think a lot of like LRH and to a degree, David Miscavige got caught up. I think LRH got caught up in the fact because he believed his own, so he drank his own tonic.
Very much so. Absolutely.
Till the end and drank it all.
Yes.
And I think if you take it as like, I think I look at it as me, if I would have stayed in, my true belief of it is to make the world a better place. And that doesn't mean it never correlated that everybody had to be OT8 to make it a better place. That's just, I remember looking down on the public at Flag as like, oh yeah, you guys are doing something for yourself, but what are you doing for mankind?
Mm-hmm.
So
and
if
that's
you
a
look
pretty
at
Standard Sea Org attitude towards the public for the most part.
right,
I had a very similar attitude too.
Right. And I think if you kind of embrace that idea of it, it's like, you're trying to make the world a better place. Mm-hmm. And what are you willing to, it's like boots in the sky, right? Isn't that the policy?
It was a lecture.
Right. Yeah, that's right. It was a lecture.
It was from the Philadelphia doctorate course.
Exactly. I mean, there was some interesting, I think when you take those, like, so I guess it's what your emphasis is. If it's all tech, see, I was never a tech person. I was always an administrative person.
Right.
Always.
Right.
I was OEC Volume 1, but that's what I did when I studied. I studied green on white policy.
Right.
And I think that's when I think of a true believer, that's what I think he is. In that, not that the tech is just something there to make money. The tech is there to self-indulge people dangle that carrot in order to get them to give money to the organization, which purpose is to make the world a better place. And we have the tools and the technology to do that. Technology just isn't red on white, although any tech person will tell you different. Green on white was the administrative tech and the eval tech. And it was almost like a 1984 kind of thing where you would eventually run the world, right? And ethics and morals. And I think in that context, I absolutely believe he's a true believer. That he thinks that if he could run the entire planet and control it, that there wouldn't be crime. Well, how much crime is on? I mean, although there's pedophiles and a lot more stuff than I knew about, that's for sure. But you're going to get that, in any form of society, unfortunately. And that's what those people are trying to eradicate. They think that you can, with that technology, eradicate those behaviors. And I think that's kind of
my point, right? I'm really glad this is a really good demonstration here, actually, of defining our terms. So I'm really glad that you said all that, because Hubbard was extremely crystal clear, and I don't know if you ever saw this or not, about the fact that the red on white is 100 times more valuable and important than the policy, right?
Exactly.
And the policy is 100 times more important, he said, than the Sea Org tech, the FOs and the missionaire tech and all that. He said they're all important. You can't pull this off without all of them. The Sea Org, missions, L. Ron Hubbard policies for the organizations, and then at the top, the technology, the methods and techniques that are applied to individuals in order to improve them spiritually and move them into higher states of awareness and ability.
Right.
I think the way I have framed this for years now is that David Miscavige might be using the organization or running the organization for his own personal aggrandizement, certainly.
Sure.
Maybe there's some strange idea in the back deep recesses of his amygdala that he has making the world a better place, but I think that's a delusional point of view from his part.
Absolutely.
But maybe he really does believe that. I'll grant you that. He might be crazy enough and megalomania enough to think that that's what he's actually doing.
Right.
But I don't think in any part of this picture that he thinks that L. Ron Hubbard's technology is the roadmap to making the world that better place. I think he has adopted a point of view that he knows best what to do.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, I agree. Yeah. I think, and that's a vehicle to get people in the fold to control them.
Yes.
And I think that's exactly what he does think, is that this is like, it's like a medicine man. It's like, I'm selling you this elixir that I just made with water and a little sugar in the background.
Right.
And once I get you in, though, it won't matter, because then you're all going to be subject to this policy and these ethics and this, and then the world will be a better place. And that's the convoluted, and some people are at the top and some people are at the bottom, and that's just life. And he's at the top.
Yeah.
And it's not, and it's unfortunately the way the organization was run, it's always been like that.
Yes.
And even with LRH, he did it as almost like a service facsimile, right? He wasn't accepted into major medicine. He wasn't accepted into psychology or psychiatry at the time. And it pissed him off because he thought he had something. And they're like, you're just basically a snake oil salesman. None of your shit even works. And he's like, well, I'll show you what a snake oil salesman is. Dabble a little Satanism and OTC in there. And that's where I'm going to go do Aleister Crowley and I'm going to go lie to, look how he got it the first time. He fooled a guy, borrowed money with no intention of paying him back. What a douchebag. But you know what? That's what a lot of people do. A lot of people seek to deceive because they think they have a higher purpose, because they think, oh, it doesn't matter because that's just the thing. And once that's done, you'll see. And it won't matter.
You're making good points here. This is good. I'm glad we're talking about this because this is helping to.
I think it frames him into perspective. I mean, so to speak of him is something I don't know. I don't know that anybody will like my point of view on David Miscavige, the man, because he's also a second gen.
That's true.
He was raised in Scientology by somebody.
Yes.
Who says he was an aggressive, mean, maybe abusive person. Mm-hmm. But then also says that, he was always a bad guy. Well, that goes against Scientology. You're born basically good. You're made bad. And most humans aren't born basically. I don't think there's Satan isn't born and just as from a baby, he's out stabbing other babies or taking their suckies or, I think you have to have those influences in order to be a truly narcissistic and controlling person. So I'll leave that alone.
Yeah, we could. That's a whole other thing that we won't get into right now. But
when it comes down, it's the same as Marty. Marty got in as a first gen to solve his own problems, and then felt the power and was let behind the curtain. And now there's somebody who doesn't necessarily have that accountability, or has the accountability. It doesn't have the excuse that maybe a David Miscavige does of really wanting to make the world a better place. Marty got in for his own selfish personal reasons.
Right.
David Miscavige got in for other reasons. And I liken it to me getting in at a young age, similar to a lot of other kids that got in at the same age, and what I felt and what my higher purpose was. Now, maybe I'm not as evil and awful as him, but when you believe in something, you're willing to do a lot.
Oh yeah.
And then when you get to a position to where you make the rules, what is that even say? Let's make sure that by the time they figure it out, we're making the rules,
right? And
we're the ones that, right?
That's right out of L. Ron Hubbard's work. That's right.
Right, exactly. So there's the true believer.
Interesting.
Yeah, tech is senior to policy, but tech wouldn't be anywhere without policy.
Well, fair enough. But again, I think that the policy only exists. L. Ron Hubbard said this over and over again.
Right. It only exists to support the tech.
To get the tech applied.
Mm-hmm.
So without the
tech's there for what?
The policy is meaningless.
But the tech's there for what? To
improve conditions.
But what is it really there for? It's there to rope you in.
It's about the money. Yeah.
Well, and dangle. And why would you give all this money away?
Yeah, because you're trying to get to higher states of awareness and ability.
Right.
Yeah, it's all about
it's all about dangling that carrot and selling them that elixir and being like, oh, right, there are addictive qualities in this elixir and you're going to want to come back for more. And I have it. Oh, but the price went up. Oh, and the price, and you need this to go with your elixir. And it's like,
exactly.
So is it it is a marriage. You have to have one, won't exist without the other. And I think that's where in LRH's evolution, he realized that you can't go imagine being in there when you had the first clear And they get her on stage and they're like, what did you have for breakfast yesterday? What's on page 50? And he's just like, oh shit. All right.
Well,
I got to make sure.
I mean, I'll argue with you a little bit on that, because I will say that the tech could exist without any of the policy at all. And it could still be applied on a one-on-one basis. And you could have people working with it and doing things like it came first. Before there was any policy, there was tech.
You mean the plagiarized part of it? Because it was all
the Dianetics, right? Which was plagiarism and hypnotism rolled into one, right? With Dianetics, Modern Science, Mental Health. So we're talking about this stuff. Like I'm making certain, for the purposes of this little discussion we're having right now, we're ignoring the fact that it's all bullshit and none of it works anyway.
Okay, gotcha. Right.
We're talking about it in a context that, well, let's say this stuff, actually works or does something productive. Within that context, right? I think all the points you made about David Miscavige's motivations are 100% correct. I agree with you about everything on that. Stepping back to this thing about tech and policy and that sort of thing, I just have to say, all of Scientology's organizations could disappear tomorrow. The Sea Org could collapse tomorrow. And 50 years from now, somebody could start the whole thing up again if all they had was the books.
Sure, and that's exactly
starting with the tech. They would not start with the policy. Nobody would start with policy and go, oh, this is a really good idea. I think we should do this. They would start with Dianetics, or they would start with fundamentals of thought or some piece of tech. And they'd start using it on another person and have that person use it on them. And from that would come, oh, how do we organize this? And who knows? Maybe they find policy and maybe they don't.
Right.
But,
well, you know, it's funny because I agree with that because I remember original book one auditing, which is Dianetics auditing, being explained to me by my uncle when I was, 8 years old, probably. And he's like, it's like two people having a really good conversation with each other and one of them realizing something they never knew about themselves. Wouldn't you want to do that? Of course you would.
It is that easy to sell it. Yeah.
And then it's like, well, yeah, of course I'd want to realize something and something that maybe was troubling you. And then you realize that now doesn't trouble you. And it's just sitting down and talking, and that's the snake oil salesman. That's like, folks, we got trouble. We got trouble right here in River City. And and without a good salesman and without a good, I think you're right. It does, one kind of begets the other, but the tech has to be there first.
Yeah.
But the policy, that's the thing is like when I came in, like I said freely, I was an admin guy. And I didn't do the tech.
That's right.
No, I had self-analysis. Yeah. And that's where David Miscavige is coming from. Right. I guarantee you he's not there auditing his BTs and like obsessing on it and doing whatever until he died.
That's right.
Elrich was really trying to make his snake oil into something real, like a fountain of youth and the finding the Holy Grail and like those kind of and that's goes back in history. People have always been searching for that. And he tapped into that and used a little hypnotism and a little smoke and mirrors to make it, ooh, I want some of this.
Exactly.
But David Miscavige didn't grow up that way. He failed as an auditor.
Yep.
He obviously showed that tech didn't really, but boy, you get into that admin, and he was a messenger, and he did that. He went down the same kind of road I went down. And I can see that fanaticism blinding you about everything. Like, look, I got this tool here, and all I got to do is keep applying this to make this tool go, and I can have whatever I want. And then now, wait a minute, maybe I'm the guy. And I'm sure he sat there probably trying to figure out, okay, what would be next, or what would I? But he doesn't believe in that part of it. He believes in the organization and the thing to keep it alive. And those people are just cattle for him. They're just a cattle going through a fring, and I'm taking and branding your ass, and there you go.
Exactly.
To that degree, that's a true believer to me.
Fair enough. And I will say, I will hold my position that he's not a true believer, but I will be more clear in saying he's not a true believer in the tech.
Absolutely. No, I agree.
Okay, 100%. Good. And that was good. That was good conversation. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no worries.
Let's wrap up.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, I'm curious about what people are going to think about this. Folks, leave your questions and comments on this based on what we've been talking about. We threw a lot of Scientologies around, just kind of, we try to do our best to explain it along the way. But if you have questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments. And we might end up, if you have some good ones out there, we might end up doing some more follow-up on this and answer some more. Dylan, thank you very much for taking the time to do this and sharing your story. I really do appreciate it.
Heck yeah. No, Chris, I'm glad that we are able. I know we didn't talk on any of the X stuff, and I think that's probably good. Mm-hmm. But this is what's needed. Like, honestly, to me, like all the little spats and Sonny and Aaron and blah, blah, blah. And like, well, but it's the same, like we have to be better people. And as much as it sounds cliche for any Scientologist, but communication is kind of a universal solvent. And if you're willing to talk about stuff, you can resolve stuff. And if you just like, this conversation is over and I'm blocking you, and it's really, I get people have to do that, but at the same time, man, we're all we have a lot of the time, so it's important. And I've gone back and forth, and I respect and like you as a person. So I didn't want to not pay homage to that. I think it's important. So
awesome. Well, I agree with you. And it's always bothered me when I have had to block or disconnect from somebody in the X community for whatever reason, sometimes justified, maybe sometimes not. And I hope that maybe eventually we can repair or restore those relationships. And
I think that's it. The door's never completely shut. Yeah. Like, you always leave it open a crack, and then there's always room to come back. Because you can't walk. It's hard to empathy, compassion, reciprocity. Those are things I didn't learn. I wasn't raised with that.
Right. And
those are things that I try to bond myself to now. Right. I really try, and it's hard. It's a learned ability, and I didn't learn it. Like it's not something innate. It's not something that you're just born with. It's something I'm learning with my kids. Like, you got to teach them right and wrong. You got to teach them to put out the fire, and you got to teach them to make good decisions and be the bigger person or take the higher road. And that's hard, man.
Yep.
And when you don't get those tools, and you're in this totalitarian society, or this not society group, which we came from, they're not only not encouraged, they're disabused from you. True. And if you exercise that, you get kicked out. And if you don't, you end up as the boss, So I aspire to be a better person than all those people.
You have a wealth of information, Dylan, and I'm sure people are going to want to pick your brain.
Yeah, no worries. I'm here. I'm here to make the world a better place.
Me too. All right, man. Thanks a lot. And again, folks, questions, comments, feedback in the comments section below. If you like this channel and what I'm doing, consider supporting me on Patreon. We'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.